In this video, I show you how I made the helmet for my Skyrim glass armor set. So, first of all, I put a toboggan on my head to protect my hair from what I was about to do and increase the thickness of the base. Then I'm going to start wrapping it in aluminum foil and securing those pieces with duct tape. I folded up some of the edges to help it be a little more stable. Then I just kept adding the foil. I began taking longer strips of tape and, starting at the front of my head, moving toward the back of my head, added those onto the foil base. When I got to the back, I pressed the tape on, then took the foil base off and wrapped the tape onto the inside. Then I put it back on my head and kept adding tape. To try to find the middle of the helmet base, I used the bridge of my nose as a guide and drew a line down the middle of my head with a permanent marker. I took the form off my head to finish drawing that line to the back. Then I drew lots of registration marks along the center line. I labeled the back and front to help me avoid some confusion later on. Then I cut along that center line, just keeping the half of the form that had most of the tape as well as my labels. After that, I measured out a center point on the side of the helmet and drew a line curving from front to back and marked the front and back of the section. Then, again, I drew lots more registration marks. I cut that out so that I had two pieces from my duct tape aluminum foil base. I labeled these separate pieces to help keep things straight. To get the larger main piece to lay flat, I cut a dart in the middle. That didn't quite work, so I moved between that point and one of the ends to cut a smaller dart, then repeated on the other side. Then it laid flat. Then, once again, I labeled this to help with my possible future confusion. To lengthen the back of the helmet, I added a strip of paper on the back of my main helmet pattern piece with tape. I repeated this for the little side piece, matching them up and adding registration marks where they lined up. I created the front base piece of the helmet in Illustrator and printed it out. Then I added this piece with tape and cut it at the appropriate angle. After that, I decided to transfer the main and side helmet pieces to wrapping paper to clean up the pattern. I traced around the pattern pieces with pencil and marked the registration marks as well. I traced over my pencil lines with marker to make it more visible. I used a ruler for areas I wanted to make sure were nice and straight. Then I labeled my new pattern pieces and cut them out. I saved cutting the darts for after the main piece was cut out, just to make things a little easier. Then I started sketching out the shape for my fin, the kind of front mohawk piece that starts at the bridge of the nose and comes up into a sort of a fin shape at the front. I don't know if there's an official term for this on a helmet, but if you do happen to know and you would like to let me know in the comments, that would be fantastic. After I had it sketched out, I went over it with marker and then cut that out as well. Then I could finally start transferring things to foam. I pinned down my pattern piece, traced it out with marker, and labeled the foam pieces. This was especially helpful with pieces I would have multiple of. Yes, I am writing the words upside down here because I couldn't turn my giant piece of foam around. Then I used a blade to cut the pieces out. I made sure to use my sharpening stone in between cutting foam pieces to keep the blade nice and sharp so it could cut better. I cut out the little triangle bits after the main piece to make it a little easier, like I did with the darts in the pattern. Then it was time to start putting the helmet together. I roughly formed some of the pieces with my hands before getting started. For the big pieces, I decided to start with the darts, squeezing contact cement into the cutout and spread it out using a piece of scrap foam. For pieces that would connect on the flat side, I spread it all over the surface. Once it had about 5 minutes to dry, I pushed those seams together, and then I could get started adding contact cement to the outer edge and spread it like I did with the other pieces. So here it is assembled. I put the side panel with the larger pieces, then put the two large main pieces together in the middle. And attached the face piece and fin. I actually ended up having to cut a piece of the fin out. I also needed to expand the open part of the eye pieces, so I cut that off. I also needed to trim off just a little bit from the other side, and I used scissors for this part since it was just a little more delicate. Then I traced out the areas I needed to add between the eyepieces and the bridge of the nose onto foam and cut that out. Then I wedged it into the open space. Of course, I later used contact cement to secure this. Then I started making my mohawk bit for the top of the helmet, using the side of my helmet to kind of sketch out the shape of where they would connect and mark how big I wanted it to be. After, I just sketched out the shape with a pencil. Once I was happy with the shape, I traced over it with marker and transferred it to foam. And then cut that out as well. Before cutting any more, I took this piece and tested that it fit the shape of my helmet. Then I cut 2 more. Using a normal ink pen, I started tracing out the details I wanted to burn onto the foam. To get an idea for where the details would go on the face sections, I cut apart the template I made. I used a nail file as a straight edge to mark the areas on the back, and for everything else, I just freehanded. I also cut apart the template from my fin, drawing the mark that separates the teal area from the gold area, and freehanded the other details. Then I decided to smooth out all my seams and round over the edges with my rotary tool. While I was at it, I cleaned up any of the edges that might have been a little rough when I cut it. I did this all over the inside and outside of the helmet where necessary. I did this till it started to get dark outside and I was finished. Then I took it inside and used a sanding sponge to continue to smooth out those edges and seams. After that, I used a heat gun to get rid of all those fuzzy bits of foam and start reshaping parts of the helmet. For instance, my fin was just a little bit crooked, so I used a heat gun to try to correct that. I also curved the front face part of the helmet and the back of the helmet. Then I could start burning in the details with a wood burning tool. While I had my tool out, I also tried adjusting part of my fin that I couldn't reach with the rotary tool, which worked out okay. I just went along the lines that I marked earlier in pen, doing a couple passes on a lot of it, trying to get nice smooth lines. I used a rounded file to sand out the edges of the burned details. Using a mixture of cornstarch and my matte gel medium, I put this in the cracks and crevices where I had joined the pieces together and wanted to be filled in. I smoothed this out using a silicone shaping tool. I also used this to smooth out areas where the foam texture had gotten a bit rough, as well as any of the seams that may have opened up a little when I used my heat gun. To store this mixture, I stored it in a clean, empty eye cream container. Then I could take some out for touch-ups. Once it had dried, I sanded it down and went back over any areas that needed it with a second layer. And once that dried, sanded it down again. Then I coated the helmet in Plasti-Dip and went over any of the areas that dried rough with the matte gel medium and sanded it smooth after drying. Then I started painting the helmet. I began by basing it out in a warm brown acrylic craft paint. I used a couple layers of this on both the inside and outside. Once both layers of brown were dry, I went over it with Iridescent Gold Course by Golden. I brushed all of the inside with one layer since I wanted this to be able to be a standalone piece. Then I added a layer of gold to the outside. Here's what the helmet looks like with one coat of the gold acrylic paint. Then I added a second coat of gold to the outside to fill in the patchy areas. You can see the difference between one layer and two layers. Then I based all the areas I wanted to later make teal in a gray paint. I mixed a darker version of my teal color to put in the crevices of all the areas that would be made from the refined malachite material in the game. Then I painted over the high points with teal. Over the teal, I used interference green, also from Golden. I came back in with some of the darker teal to add in some detail areas, smudging it out with my fingers. Then I went back over that with the interference green. And this is how that looked. I added a few sort of scratch or shine marks by putting the interference color down thickly and using a quick swapping motion where I wanted it to go. Then I touched up the gold and began tarnishing it with copper. I concentrated this on areas I thought would touch my skin, where the oils from my skin might begin to tarnish the metal, as well as crevices, areas where the teal and gold met, and anywhere I wanted detail to stick out a little more. I chose copper to tarnish instead of a brown or black to weather because I preferred the look and it matched my reference pictures better. Then I started mixing the two parts of the resin to coat all of the refined malachite areas. If I'm pronouncing that wrong, I do apologize. So I just tried spreading the resin evenly over the areas, wiping up any of my messes as I went. I rested it on the handle of my camera tripod to cure overnight. After it completely cured, I tried to sand off some of the bits that ran. And here's what the finished helmet looks like. Thanks for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to my channel. If you have any questions about my first foam armor build, feel free to ask me in the comments below. I've created a playlist for my glass armor build work logs and have linked it on screen as well as in the description box below. Thanks again and have a great day.